I'm completely aware that I and my colleagues on panel stand between you and lunch. So we're going to try and have a discussion that I hope you will find interesting. As you've been told, my name is Joe Kibazo, which for you who come from Rwanda, you know it means problem. But I'm hoping that I will not be a problem. And so, but instead, we shall have an enriched discussion. We have a stellar panel to help us through this very, very difficult subject called of peacekeeping. Let me first say a few words about it, and which is this. On the face of it, peacekeeping is simply about helping countries torn between conflict and conditions, and creating conditions for lasting peace. However, peacekeeping is complex, given the very different nature of conflicts, historical grievances, and increasingly the presence of non-state actors in this whole, on this whole subject. As of 2024, there are 5 United Nations peacekeeping operations in Africa. Yet insecurity remains widespread in many, many regions. It has been worsening, driven by transnational insurgencies, disinformation, we talked about, you've been hearing conversations around that, and in some cases even climate-driven. So increasingly we've seen the African Union, and we've got the former chairman, you know, the Honorable Faki, sort of, who's here with us, and he, of course, would have authorized and have helped arrange many missions that we now see. There are now 17 PSOs, which are the regional peace support operations in Africa. Many helped organized by the distinguished former chairman. Here is the question for us to discuss now. Is the continent able to make the investment in regional capacity, leverage innovation, and reform missions? In other words, can we in Africa get to a point of a roadmap of transitioning from externally dependent peacekeeping to African-owned, African-led, and globally respected peace enforcement frameworks? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the framework for our discussion for the next few moments. And to do that, we have a stellar panel who will be joining us to explain the future of peacekeeping missions in Africa. And they are, and I'll call them out now, I hope they're all around, Ambassador and General Patrick Nyamuvumba. Is he? Oh, yes, he's over there. Give him a round of applause. Now, General Patrick was, of course, the peace mission lead in Darfur. As I said, you've got a stellar panel of people who have actually been involved in the business. Welcome, Jim. Then we've got Professor Philip Kasaija Apuli, who's from the Department of Political Science at Makerere University. But he's also not only theoretical, but an active participant, having done missions in Somalia and South Sudan. Professor Apuli. And then we've got Clotilde Mbaraga Gasharbo. Where's Madame Gasharbo? Who is the former Assistant Secretary General for the UN Department of Safety and Security. And she, of course, was even the lead in Mali. And before that, she was, of course, working in the UN department in New York, very much on the policy issues. And last but by no means least, Ambassador Ahmed Ould Abdallah, who's now the Board of Advisors of the International Peace and Security Institute. But not only that, he was the lead on peace missions in Burundi and also created the UN office for West Africa, looking after Côte d'Ivoire, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Where is he? He's not around? Ah, Ambassador, we need you here, sir. We need your wisdom. Give him a round of applause. See, so So as I said, that you do have a stellar panel, and they are all have all been practitioners in various peace missions. But what I thought I'd do is start off with a question to each of the panelists about where we are now. Now, we had a discussion before, but of course, and I'm hoping that I won't have to be on a peacekeeping mission myself, because there's some varying views. But I want to start by sort of saying, okay, General Patrick Mvumba, where do you see the state of peacekeeping on the African continent today?
First of all, thank you very much, and let me also start by thanking the organizers of this conference. I think it's timely. Your question is a bit loaded in terms of where we are, but I think before going into the specifics, we also need to understand a bit of peacekeeping in broad terms. And what are the drivers of conflict that lead to peacekeeping. But in the African context, I think one also needs to have a quick scan at the current global geopolitical environment, which then will help us understand where we are as Africa. I'm assuming that by the time the trade war on tariffs and all is finished, and Europeans now looking inwards, increasing their defense spending on themselves for obvious reasons, whether the threats that they do anticipate are real or not. So that in a way therefore leaves Africa, in my view, on its own. So for us to avoid the 1885 situation where European powers put us on the table as stake and cut us into pieces, which they ate and digested at will, I think it's now time for us now to have this kind of conversation. So let me say that, having said that, over the last 30 years, there has been an evolution in peacekeeping. Peacekeeping initially was conceived as an interpositional tool between warring states. That era is over, but the nature of peacekeeping has more or less remained the same. So today, the main drivers of conflict that we have, to a large extent, political and socioeconomic exclusion, lack of governance, or governance, lack of governance structures, and lack of governance generally. We have terrorism, we have violent extremism, least but not least, and what is emerging at the moment is conflict, climate-induced conflicts and climate-induced displacements. So therefore, today, looking at peacekeeping today, one has to take into consideration the current conflict drivers. And you talked about missions in Africa. Traditional peacekeeping, if you take again a quick scan, we have the oldest peacekeeping mission that still exists today, was established in 1949. That is in Pakistan and India. We have one in Cyprus, established in 1964. The current force commander of the mission in Cyprus was born 10 years after the mission was established. We have the mission between Syria and Israel, 1974. We have UNIFIL Lebanon, 1978. Close at home, we have MONUSCO. Now, MONUSCO, as it is now, has been there I'm just taking a quick scan of the oldest missions, yes. And so MONUSCO has been around, MONUSCO as it is, since 2010. Before it was MONUC. Now, MONUSCO, from 2010 to date, has had an expenditure of $17.4 billion. Before it, MONUC had spent $8 billion. So cumulatively, money spent on MONUC and MONUSCO is $25 billion. And what do we have for it? You have more armed groups in DRC, in Eastern DRC, from maybe 120 when MONUC was there, to more than 230 now. You have really nothing to show for that type of expenditure. So if you talk about $25 billion and you look at the state of Eastern DRC today, now that brings me to where do we want peacekeeping to go? And back to your question, where are we?
Yeah.
That's where we are. We are nowhere, basically, as Africans.
All right,
in terms of
okay.
peacekeeping.
We are nowhere, as the General has said. We shall go to the issue of funding as we develop the conversation. Professor, as I said, could you briefly, the General has laid out some of the various historical missions that we've had, but the key thing is that if I was to ask you now, say, where are we? He says we are nowhere. Are we nowhere? With all those billions that have been spent.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me yet again to be part of this conversation. I think the question, we need to step back and what is the history of peacekeeping? The document which we normally use is the Charter of the UN. If you pick the Charter of the UN, there's nowhere where the word peacekeeping exists. It's not there. Now, peacekeeping as it evolved as a conflict management tool is an improvisation. The improvisation from where? The first peacekeeping mission, in the real sense of peacekeeping, the deployment of multinational forces in a conflict area to separate the belligerents based on the three principles of peacekeeping: consent, impartiality, and non-use of force, is 1956, UNEF 1. Now, from 1956 to date, we've had about 75 plus United Nations peacekeeping missions. Out of those, about 35 or 33, 35 have been in Africa. Currently, we have the majority of the peacekeeping missions of the UN. There are 5: Western Sahara, Central African Republic, DRC, South Sudan, and ABA. Now, we need also again to understand, we have what we call the traditional peacekeeping, based on those three concepts. But increasingly, because of the problems which the General has pointed out, if we did a situation analysis, conflict situation analysis in Africa today, the causes of conflict, the drivers of conflicts, we do have all these, and hence we have also adopted, because increasingly relying on the United Nations became difficult. So we also said, look, we can have regional peacekeeping. And under Chapter 8 of the UN, where states are encouraged to establish regional arrangements, this is where now organizations like the African Union have come to also do peacekeeping. And as the moderator, you have said, yes, currently we have about 17 peace support missions. 16 of them are more political missions. It's only one, which is really a typical peacekeeping mission, which is AUSOM, the African Union Support and Stabilization Mission in Somalia, which started out as AMISOM, African Union Mission in Somalia, transitioned into ATMIS, the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, and now we have the AUSOM. So if you ask me today, what is the status of peacekeeping on the continent? I will not differ from what the General said. Peacekeeping is in crisis. And we can go into the reasons why it is in crisis. Yes, we have these missions, the United Nations, the 5. I'm very sure in the next 4-5 years, possibly we may have only one, because there's no stomach. And as we heard yesterday, the politics, the geopolitics in the Security Council, which is the ultimate body to mandate a peacekeeping mission. There is no stomach for peacekeeping anymore within the context of the United Nations Security Council. But does that mean that we may not? The last peacekeeping mission that was established was MINUSCA in 2014. In Africa, by the way, as an anecdote, for those of you who want to know, the first peacekeeping mission was ONUC in 1960. This is the mission that was established in the Congo, 1960, and left in 1964. So, if you asked me today, how do I view this improvisation? Because peacekeeping is not supposed to be permanent. It is an improvisation. It's supposed to lead to something. You deploy forces, or you deploy multidimensional missions, civilians, police, and the army, for you to transit into something. That, I'm very sure now, is becoming very, very difficult. And the challenges, we can talk about them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So from the professor, it's in crisis. There's no appetite for peacekeeping. Madame Gasaraboy, you were formerly, at the Department for Safety and Security, and of course, you led in Mali, as I was explaining to earlier. I mean, on this question today, you've had two views, basically saying it doesn't exist or shouldn't, or is in crisis. What's your view, briefly, before we go on to other points?
Thank you very much. I just want to emphasize on one subject called setting mission, how the mission is set. I was lucky enough to be in New York as Assistant Secretary General for the Department of Safety and Security, sitting on inner cycle when decision-making is made for a country to be set and to convey a mission in a country. And I was lucky enough later to be in another position when I went to the ground and see how that decision has been taken to make peace in a country. What is happening really? What's going on? And how this implementation is done? And what are the lessons learned? So just wanted to tackle on setting mission. There is a conflict in somewhere, there's a crisis. Member states sit, oh, we have a problem here. We need to intervene. And by the way, the country is so shaken by the crisis, the conflict. There are other people who are saying, oh, we need to set a mission over there. There will be two scenarios. One country can say, no, we don't need a peacekeeping mission. We need to use all the means of prevention. And it happened when I was in another position in Guinea. Mission was set to be set in Guinea, Conakry. I was resident coordinator there, and I'm so glad because Mr. Ahmed was close to that issue. Maybe he would take it up. But I would say one tool which saved Mali, which saved Guinea, to not being a peacekeeping mission, was that because there was internal, traditional culture of dialogue. There was intervention of regional institutions to be there close to the Guinean and tackling that negotiation. It happened that there was no peacekeeping option. But what happened in Mali? I was resident coordinator before,
yes.
2009, 2011. A peaceful country. If you remember, Mali was like a beloved country by donors. Beloved country called the governance was the reference in Mali. And I was called to go to New York for, that's the position of Assistant Secretary General for Global Security. And suddenly, I saw a report coming that Mali is collapsing. The yesterday country, which was stable, collapsed. Then, who's taking decision? Again, member state. Unfortunately, there was no peace, there was no negotiation, terrorism and threat and so on. And because there was no way that any country in Africa can intervene to fight the terrorism and the jihadism, the main country, the powerful one, intervened. Guess what? We got a budget of 1.2 billion. 1.2 billion was mostly offsetting the mission. And when there is a mission setting, there is always a saying, oh, in 5 years, or in 1 year, and 2 years, we'll have exit strategy. And this strategy was saying, okay, we will intervene, we'll fight this terrorist, and the country will become peaceful. It didn't happen. So the implementation phase, I think that's really the key. We can take another example, maybe Rwanda. What happened, maybe other examples. But the setting mission is where the resolution also is taken. Security Council is there. If the resolution is taken, even the mission is there on the ground. We have to get support to the Security Council. So somehow, what is the ownership of that country? What is the sovereignty of this country? Who's really thinking in the country level to really set up it? It happened in country as a secretary in Rwanda. But it needs to happen on other missions. And I'm saying that if it may happen on setting mission, the ingredient to make it happen on exit strategy may be coming definitely from internal. We will insist on that one, and we come up then to the other stage of what can we use as mechanism for the regional, the African Union, because we're talking about Africa, other mechanism. I think we were asking about the model of peacekeeping. I used those one because it was a UN peacekeeping, but there will be probably other one when we can set up the African Union and the UN when they're together and the mechanism. But I really want to set up that setting mission and the exit strategy is two things, too key to think about it, and meanwhile, to see what kind of tools you can use, negotiation, dialogue, whatever you call it, but make it happen that you exit the peacekeeping. Use those funds for something which can stabilize the country.
It seems to me that the issue of funding keeps coming up, but we shall get to that. What I wanted to establish, and I'll talk to sort of Ambassador Ahmed Ould Abdallah, is that where we are now and where we need to go. So if Ambassador, if you could give us, you've had a lot of experience both in Burundi, and of course setting up the UN office in West Africa, where you dealt with Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire. You see those conflicts, you see. So where we are now, but how do we start transitioning to what we want to see as a continent? We heard already from the first speakers, peacekeeping doesn't exist, is in crisis. So could you kindly help us on that? Where we are now and how we can start going, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my thanks to the organizer of the conference, and for selecting this issue, which keeps going, the issue of peacekeeping. A short reminder, the peacekeeping started in 1956 when troops were deployed between Egypt and Israel after the Suez Canal. So it was a war, and this is very important to me to remind participants of. It was a war between two official governments. Suggestion came from Canada to do something, and after the ceasefire, international troops were deployed on the front line, separating two official armies. To be short, since then, the operation we have now are troops sent in a civil war. A civil war is a different case. You don't have an official army opposed to an official enemy. It is a war within the country between two regions or two groups or two ethnies and so on. That make the war, the peacekeeping, very difficult. Because the official UN troop or African Union troop respond to their leadership, whereas the rebellion don't. And even the rebellion are not united. Some respond to their leader, who is enemy of another, and even some are competing with it. Therefore, today, as most conflicts are internal, how to adapt peacekeeping, to this situation. And this is a question to all. Should the international community or African Union try to select a number of countries to help because they have efficient or united army, like what is happening in Mozambique? Or should we keep maintaining the traditional classical peacekeeping like in Mali recently, which was, I think the conference is open, we can say, it was a collapse. Not because the failure of the troops, not the failure of the UN mission, but the conflict itself cannot be addressed. It is more police, more ethnical, more religious than a conflict like the one initiated Israeli-Egyptian. And last point, I was in Somalia. We have a troop in Somalia since 92 or 93. The more, from my experience, the more a conflict lasts, the more its origins are forgotten. It becomes a business to help facilitate traffic of all kinds, not only drugs, cigarettes, but migrant drugs. So the parties to the conflict are against peace because it is the end of their business. And you come to tell them to make peace with various troops.
Yeah.
So these are a number of questions we see, but there were peacekeeping.
Yeah.
And today, we have to adapt to peacekeeping when you have regional, religious, or tribal systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm going to, it seems to me that we've heard three key things. So one, it is nowhere. Peacekeeping is nowhere, especially on the continent. Two, that is in crisis. And of course, three, the issue that the former UN Assistant Secretary General talked about, which is the funding, the challenges of funding. And so we are now talking about, and I think I mentioned earlier on that we're now into very much Africa with its own peace missions. But and so before we go on to the models that we must have or do away with, I want to address this issue of funding, because General, you talked about how many billions have been spent, and without any of that, we can't go forward, you see. So I want to call on, with your permission, and sort of the permission of the audience, on Dr. Kaberuka, who you saw on the previous panel, but he happens to be still with us, and he is the African Union's High Representative on the Peace Fund. Do we have a microphone somewhere where we can get to Dr. Kaberuka, appointed by, of course, by the former chair, and working very much with the former chairman. Can we have a microphone, please, to Dr. Kaberuka? Because it seems to all of us in discussion, without that aspect of funding, we will perhaps be able to go nowhere. Dr. Kaberuka.
Joe, thank you. Don't you think Mustafa could be the most appropriate? if you don't mind.
I have no problems. I am guided by, it's because of the Peacekeeping Fund. That's why we were asking.
I would be happy to fill him in, but if you could give me Micro, please. Let me do that.
Okay, sir.
You're the specialist.
He's passed it on to the boss.
So allow me to speak in French.
Yes.
I'm more comfortable in French. Je crois ce qu'il faut retenir globalement est que le système, les missions de maintien de la paix, telles qu'on les a connues depuis 65 ans en Afrique, ont vécu. Quelqu'un a rappelé que la première date des années 1960 au Congo, c'était au moment où je naissais. Moi, je suis né en 1960. Et jusqu'à là, il y a une mission dans ce pays. Déjà, ça en dit long. Il faut reconnaître que la nature des conflits et leur envergure a également changé. C'est le cas du Mali. Ce sont des groupes terroristes qui ont attaqué en 2012, après ce qui s'est passé en Libye. L'Union africaine a réagi, donc il y avait une mission africaine, la MISCA, qui par la suite s'est transformée en MINUSMA. MINUSMA, ensuite en MISMA, ensuite en MINUSMA. Je vais vous raconter une histoire. En 2014, j'étais ministre des Affaires étrangères du Tchad. Nous avions une réunion à Bamako, justement sur la question de la paix. Et puisque le contingent tchadien fut parmi les premiers avec les Français à intervenir au nord du Mali, il y a eu les premiers kamikazes qui ont explosé sur la sentinelle des troupes tchadiennes à Tessalit. Il y avait M. Latsous qui était le sous-secrétaire en charge des questions de paix et de sécurité, questions de maintien de la paix. Et donc nous avons pris un avion de Bamako pour aller à Tessalit. Ça fait 3 heures de vol. Alors, il y avait le contingent tchadien. Les forces ont été commandées dans leur ensemble par un général rwandais, Kazura. Donc j'ai trouvé Kazura et puis son adjoint de la région qui s'appelle Moussa, c'est un Tchadien. Vous imaginez, au moment du déjeuner, on nous a amené des crevettes. Des crevettes à Tessalit. Alors vraiment, je me suis interrogé à haute voix. D'abord, les troupes tchadiennes ne connaissent pas les crevettes. Au Tchad, on ne connaît pas les crevettes. On mange les criquets, oui, mais pas des crevettes. Comme tous les gens du Sahel, on ne connaît pas les crevettes. Les tentes qui étaient données aux troupes étaient des tentes de cérémonie. Donc des tentes comme ça, parce qu'au désert, il faut des tentes avec des pieux et avec des cordes pour attacher. Elles sont sous forme conique. Ça dénote les coûts de ces opérations. Quelqu'un a parlé de 20 quelques milliards de dollars pour le Congo, mais la MINUSMA coûtait plus d'1 milliard de dollars par an. Malgré donc la présence de cette mission, elle était une mission de maintien de la paix. Au Mali, il n'y avait pas de paix à maintenir. Comme l'a dit le grand frère Ould Abdallah, il ne s'agit pas de 2 forces identifiées qui se font face à face. Il s'agit d'une menace terroriste. Les terroristes étant une menace à la paix et à la sécurité. En principe, le mandat doit être un mandat coercitif pour permettre à ces forces-là de combattre. À Tessalit, on a trouvé les troupes dans un camp. Au-dessus, il y a des barbelés. Les troupes tchadiennes, une semaine après, étaient obligées de quitter le camp pour camper en dehors contre l'avis de leur chef des Nations Unies parce qu'il n'était pas permis. Ils ont dit, mais comment on va être dans un camp, dans une zone hostile, et si les gens nous attaquent? C'est dire vraiment les contradictions dans le concept lui-même et la réalité qui est devenue tout à fait différente. En 2017, quand je suis devenu président de la Commission de l'Union africaine, Le premier acte que j'ai fait, c'est de signer un accord avec le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, un accord cadre sur les questions de paix et de sécurité. La plupart des questions débattues au Conseil de sécurité concernent l'Afrique. Il faut reconnaître et saluer l'engagement de M. Guterres. Jusqu'aujourd'hui, il s'est réellement engagé. Mais je vous assure que sur le terrain, la machine onusienne ne suit pas. Elle ne suit pas. Il y a une tradition, il y a des méthodes, et les missions des Nations Unies sont devenues un machin, excusez-moi le terme, ce n'est pas moi qui l'ai employé en premier, mais ça ne marche pas. Ce sont des dépenses importantes, mais qui ne règlent pas des problèmes qui sont nouveaux. Alors, et là je passerai par la suite, je n'aurai la parole à Kaberuka, même s'il ne veut pas la prendre, la question du financement.
Yes.
La question du financement.
Yes.
On leur a dit, écoutez, ça coûte cher. Les Africains sont prêts à mobiliser les hommes. Donnez-nous le moyen pour les aider en matériel et en logistique pour qu'ils fassent le travail. Ça a commencé avec le G5 Sahel, les pays du Sahel, Tchad, Mauritanie, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Ils ont mobilisé des troupes et ils ont demandé aux Nations Unies un soutien pour combattre le terrorisme parce que la mission des Nations Unies n'est pas mandatée à le faire. On n'a pas donné l'argent. Ils ont demandé en tout et pour tout 500 millions de dollars. Alors que l'autre coûtait 1 milliard et plus. Jamais. Jamais la somme n'a été donnée. Eh bien, nous avons commencé à travailler et il y a 2 ans, 1 an et demi, en 2023, si ma mémoire est exacte, nous avons réussi à faire adopter une résolution aux Nations Unies, la résolution 2719, qui permet aux Nations Unies de financer à hauteur de 75% les missions africaines de maintien ou de soutien à la paix. Nous avons voulu que cette résolution-là soit mise en œuvre dans le cas de la Somalie actuellement. Eh bien, depuis ce moment-là, nous nous battons, et ça, je donnerai la parole à Donald, il va vous expliquer ce qui s'est passé. La conclusion est qu'un seul pays, malgré l'unanimité de l'ensemble des pays des Nations Unies, a refusé, et donc, ces financements ne peuvent pas être mobilisés pour la Somalie. Merci. Alors, en réalité, qu'est-ce qu'on veut? Ça, vraiment, le système lui-même, dans son ensemble, il a un problème. Je pense qu'il faut maintenant nous interroger nous-mêmes ce qu'on doit faire. Est-ce qu'on doit attendre parce que ça nous concerne? Nous nous sommes battus pour réactiver notre fonds de la paix. Je remercie beaucoup Donald pour le travail qu'il a fait. Nous avons déjà mobilisé à peu près 400 millions de dollars. Ça, c'était même une condition des partenaires. Il faut que vous interveniez, vous aussi vous mettez la main dans la poche. Malgré tout ça, il y a un refus clair. Donc, vraiment, les missions de maintien de la paix telles qu'on les a connues, je crois qu'ont vécu. Il faut peut-être trouver d'autres solutions à cette problématique. Je m'arrête là et puis je donne la parole à Donald pour vous donner les détails. Merci.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much. I don't know if Dr. is going to. I'm not so sure you can fully add to that, since he seems to have sort of completed. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and former Chairman of the African Union. As I said, one of the things that I thought would be is that where are we going? You see, and we're running out of time, and I know there's a few questions. So, where do you think in 2025 we should be? Or rather, as we look forward, and I've got one more contributor that I want to call on, but I want you to briefly answer that question, each of you. General?
All right.
You've told us what your view was. It's nowhere.
Okay, having said that, it really doesn't mean that nothing cannot be done. And so the starting point was, what can we do as Africans? There's a lot that can be done. We have the human resources. We have most of our countries are participating in peacekeeping or peace support operations. If you look at Somalia, it's a predominantly African mission, and so are others on the continent. Where I served in Darfur, the biggest contributors were African countries, including Rwanda. So here's the thing. We have to be realistic that in as long as human beings exist, we'll have conflicts. Peacekeeping is one of the mitigations. Speaking utopically, the ideal situation would be not to have conflicts. But unfortunately, we live in a world that is not ideal. So what do we do as Africans? The African Union has the infrastructure in place. But I think in terms of models, if we want to succeed, there are certain things that are working. And what I have in mind is the example of my country, Rwanda, and what is going on in Mozambique. This is a bilateral arrangement. But what has happened in the last, okay, a quick look again, if you look at, say, the province of Cabo Delgado, it's about 82,000 square kilometers. The initial deployed force was about 2,000. So may be confined in a space of about 20,000 square kilometers, almost as big as Rwanda. But they've been able to reverse the trends. And so there is relative stability, the people have returned to their homes. So there is what we see that works. So how do we build on that? So bilateral arrangements in themselves might not be, there's something we can build on for them to have legitimacy, to have scale. So that is now where the continental body comes in, like the AU, to support these arrangements. But again, for effectiveness, we need to employ, as we said, technology. The force that was deployed there was a light infantry force supported by mechanized elements and some artillery, plus intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities. So if we could scale on that, even in other, looking into the future, we've been talking about AI. AI would be very ideal in peacekeeping. One, in terms of early warning, but also in synchronization of fires, whether ground-based or area-based. So there is a lot that could be done. But also, not only that, in terms of technologies, we're now in an era of disinformation and digital attacks. We need to anticipate that. So, and that's where, therefore, technology comes in. And that, in a way, helps our troops to mitigate risks for them, particularly if you employ intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, whether manned or unmanned or satellite, to have like a 24-hour situation awareness, and of course, plus that is at the tactical level. But what has been missing with these UN missions is lack of understanding context. Yeah. So if you, and I say this with all honesty, I used to see where I served, if you bring somebody from, for argument's sake, from Peru, we had an officer, and I could say this because it's something that happened, from South Korea. I didn't know that dogs were delicacy. So he killed a dog and ate it. And we called him and said, look, this doesn't happen here because this dog belongs to somebody. And therefore, he said, but it was roaming on the streets. And I thought, we said, no. In the context of you have to understand the cultures, you have to understand. He did it again. And we were forced to ask his country to take him back. That is a simple thing, but context. Now, let me talk about political context.
Hold that thought. I just want to ask the audience if any of them, from what you've heard so far, because then, I'll then bring in the other members of the panel. Is there anybody who has any point they want to raise a question, from the panel and what you've heard so far? There's a gentleman there and there's there. Can we just take those before I bring in the other members again? Can we have some mics? No, I think there was somebody here, around here. And then there was a gentleman, and then there was a yellow there. Can we? Have you seen them here? There, the hand behind you, ma'am. Here. There. Yes. If you keep your hand up, then the mic can get to you. Yep. Very quickly, we're short of time, so...
Thank you. I've worked for 22 years in UN field missions. And, experience shows that field missions succeed. And this is something we need to talk about the politicization of the missions and about their political intent. No mission is a thing in itself. This is not a technical entity. Missions work for somebody. They work for political reasons. They work for mandates which can be obvious or which can be hidden. At least 7/8 of these mandates are hidden. Experience shows that missions succeed only when all members of the P5 work together. And I can give you these examples.
If you just hold that thought, it's just that I want to get in another point, but I think I've got your point. The gentleman there with the yellow, at the top, and then Madame, I'll come to you. Over the gentleman over there. No, over there, he's got the microphone. Just that one.
Thank you. To General Nyamvumba, my main concern is with MONUSCO, 25 years and 25 billion spent USD, average of $1 billion per year, and yet we are nowhere. My feeling is that the wise and rich normally put their resources where they are assured of return of investment, especially over a long time. So why does it not apply to this particular mission? And I've heard especially our president and other people critical of those resources that have eventually led us nowhere. I'm of a media background and I have a feeling there's something I don't pick as to why such massive investments continuously go into something that gets us only nowhere. Thank you.
Okay, can we have a mic to the front here, for Madame Valentine Rugabiza? Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you will know, she's the UN Secretary General's Special Representative in CAR. Is that okay?
Yes. Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists for all their insights. The point I'd like to make will remind of a few points made earlier. Peacekeeping mission do not intervene in isolation. And context matters, but also diagnosis of the causes of the conflict and a shared assessment of the most adequate responses. Now, from the onset, it has to be clear that peacekeeping can only work temporarily. And this brings me to the point made, one of the key messages of His Excellency the President yesterday: ownership. When is it that a peacekeeping operation is asked by a country that will become the host to the peacekeeping operation, or is mandated by the UN Security Council. It is because that particular country, at that particular point, do not have effective ownership or capabilities to ensure its security. Now, the peacekeeping will be put in place to temporarily provide a solution to that problem. But that solution will work only if it is designed from the beginning as a temporary solution, so meaning with a clear exit strategy. And that there is a clear assessment all the way throughout to say, is this the objectives, the mandated priority task, are they being achieved or not? And the mandated priority tasks have evolved in time. Remember, many mentioned the beginning of peacekeeping. At the beginning of peacekeeping, protection of civilians was not part of the mandate. Protection of civilians became an important part of the mandate after the most important failure in the history of peacekeeping and in the history of the UN, which was the peacekeeping operation in Rwanda. Then the protection of civilians became a core task of peacekeeping. Now, how will external forces put together protect civilians in another country? Precisely because that country doesn't have the capacity to do so. But that can only be effective if, while that support is being provided, the capacity is being built, that there is a security system that is being built to be able to take over all those responsibilities of a peace operation. I am in Central Africa Republic, as you have mentioned. So MINUSCA there, what is being done today? Not only the protection of civilians, yes, there have been improvement on that, but also extension of the state authority and presence, more than 40% of that in the last 3 years. Now, it doesn't mean that peacekeeping can do everything. And I think that it's important to not have over-expectations over peacekeeping. And over-expectations is to say, well, peacekeeping can be a substitute. Peacekeeping is not designed to be a substitute to the national security and should never be perceived as so. We have Central African security leaders who are here. It's another key point. They have to be a trust relationship with the government. Because if there is basically discrepancy between what the government perceived as its priorities and what are the priorities mandated to the peace operation, then clearly you will have situations such as situations which were encountered with MINUSMA. But those are some of the points I wanted to make. And the context point, well, you intervene in a country, in a Sahel country. Well, will you, as the chairperson say, well, will you have crevette in a Sahel country? But understanding of the context, understanding of the root causes of the conflict, understanding of the appropriate responses, yes, when that is made, peacekeeping can make a difference. And let's not forget, it is an extraordinary act of solidarity. Well, try to imagine a moment. All these countries, and most of them African countries, deploying their forces under a command that is not a national command. And this is what peacekeeping is. When you speak of a peacekeeping operation, 90% of the personnel is uniform personnel. Only 10% is civilian. 90%, it is the military, it is the police. So deployed by other countries in solidarity to support another country to basically get back to its feet and be able to be to a point where conditions are met for a peace operation to exist without a reversal to what was the heat of the conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame Valentine. We only have a few moments. So, Professor, I'm going to go down the line to be able to. We heard some points, but what I also want you to do is this whole aspect of in 10 years' time, taking in some of the points that have been raised, you see, for each of you. In other words, where is the future? Where will we be in 5, 10 years' time? Taking in some of the points Madame Valentine has made, and it's not a substitute, as she said. And those questions that were raised, is it politicized? Maybe as we look forward, it won't be. So start with you very briefly, and then I'll go down the line.
I think also I need to say that it's good that we are having this conversation now in view of the last week's meeting, ministerial meeting on future UN peacekeeping in Berlin. And it's quite interesting because the current US government, the view of the current US government is that peacekeeping missions should work themselves out of the job, which of course goes to what the Madam is saying from the UN rep in Central African Republic. Peacekeeping is not supposed to be permanent. But if you ask me where do we want to go, of course the General has talked about the model of a bilateral arrangement. We've seen it, Rwanda, Mozambique, Rwanda, CAR, Uganda, South Sudan, and certainly there will be others. But we also have another model, which is the ad hoc coalitions, where countries come together, self-help, and they try to resolve a problem. The Multinational Joint Task Force Against Boko Haram, the G5 Sahel, the Accra Initiative. Now, of course, we have also a third model, which is more conventional, which is the AU, the African Union Support Stabilization Mission in Somalia. But increasingly that model, of course all these models have issues. The third model is going to be very problematic because of partly the issue of the funding. Of course, the issue of the funding should not also be really very problematic in the context of a continent which has produced two of the richest persons to walk the face of the earth. Now, you can have all the disagreements, but we are not a poor continent. Now, of course, in the context of and also the question of investment, if you look at the assessment of MONUSCO started out as MONUC in 1999, specifically tasked with the implementation of the Lusaka Agreement. That is the context in which that mission was deployed. These days I don't even hear anybody talk about the Lusaka Agreement. But someone had this idea in 2010 that that mission, which had been established in 1989, had to change name and add there a word stabilization. Of course, I can understand in the context of the doctrine of African peace support. It makes sense because we do not do peacekeeping in Africa. We do peace support. We support the governments which are in place to build capacity. So that's why we don't do peacekeeping, the tradition of peacekeeping as we know it. The consent, the impartiality, and the non-use of force, except in self-defense and defense of the mission.
All right.
So lastly, the other bit which I also wanted to mention, because we want to talk about the future. So increasingly what I have seen and what I think will happen in the future is we need to work the peacekeeping missions out of a job. Why? Because we have other alternatives. We have alternatives under the APSA. And it's good that the former chairperson is here. The APSA framework is a self-contained framework. We have early warning, we have standby force, we have the peace fund, we have the panel of the wise. And Dr. Kaberuka, I don't know whether you remember the report that you did, the first calabash, because you did 3 calabashes, you recommended 3 things. The first calabash is talking about prevention. We do mediation. You prevent. Because the fraction, the amount of money that you spend on peacekeeping and the amount of money that you spend on prevention is very small on prevention. So we need to prevent. But for you to prevent, you need to do early warning. In order for you to do early warning, you need also to do early response. I'm a practitioner of early warning. I do early warning basically for a living. part of what I do as an academic, but I also do early warning. But I have also seen, and it works. Because
Okay.
for me, if I give you choices, I'll give you the options. This is the situation, and these are the response options that you need to take. You either take them or you don't. But
All
most
right.
often, of course, we find the policymakers don't take the options. So,
All right. So working itself out, and we don't need peacekeeping in the future. Madame Gassarboy, very briefly, because I've been
Very
instructed.
briefly, I think the executive secretary of ISCA has a job
Yes.
to do, and helped by the board and the Advisory Council. If I have the outcome of this meeting, since yesterday, if I see this exhibition here, if we are talking about Africa and solution by African, I will go and take the billionaire on the continent and then tell them that we have a new business, and this business is investing in security for Africa. And I do think that when I look at the outcome of this 15 May ministerial meeting in Berlin, I was just looking at the cost and the funding is going to cross tomorrow by the American, maybe followed by others. So tomorrow, missions are going to cross, many missions, 5 missions in Africa. So the conflict is still there, everything's still there, so it's going to be a mess. But if I have maybe approach the private sector to invest in this intelligence, drone, and this, and combine with the dialogue, combine with negotiation, combine with the African Union Peace and the Security Commission, I do think that really we can come out with this vision of everlasting. I do think that really we should maybe leave this room thinking, who are they? We can approach them and tell them, this is a new business. It's just risky to invest in the security, but it's also the one thing which came out from Berlin recently was training, investing a lot, sending a lot of troops on the ground to help on training, on new technology, and investing a lot in what we're talking about. So yesterday I was attending this offensive and defensive meeting on the military defense, the chief of defense of different countries. And this is exactly what they were talking about. There is a still lack of. And I think really being on this issue of funding, of costing, I think we need to think about it. But the will also, of course, will be combined if we wanted it to have it. And other mechanism, of course, will be the governance, security, and negotiation, whatever. But I do think really we have to think seriously on this funding mechanism and how we combine, of course, with dialogue and communication and everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ambassador, as we finish the last word in a few seconds, could you? Yeah, your mic is on.
Okay.
So yeah, if you could just sort of give us, when we look at the future and some of the points raised, but sort of as briefly as possible.
Well, it will be brief. Mr. Chairman, two observations. One, there is no peacekeeping, no war without money. The famous German strategic chancellor said, money, la monnaie est l'argent de... Money is the nerve of war.
Yeah.
The engine of war, money.
Yeah.
So we have to have money
Yes.
to maintain peace or to do.
Yeah.
In presence of a chairman of African
Yes.
Union, my understanding, for instance, the peacekeeping, the UN, the African as a continent, our contribution to UN peacekeeping is 2%. It is not important. So
Yes.
we cannot, not through African Union, not through UN, we pay less than 2%. How could people listen to us? How could
Sure.
At the same time, African soldiers are great. I'm not saying that to be, to please people. No, in World War I, World War II, Africans were on the front in Europe. They were in Asia.
Yeah.
I remember someone from your region told me he was surprised to be in Asia, in Thailand, African troop. So my point is, one, we need to find resources to help African Union or whatever, like Rwanda and Mozambique, to have resources.
Yeah.
If not, we keep talking like in the 60s. We have to change that. Second, we have to address also, and it is very difficult, as I mentioned earlier, it is almost impossible to maintain peace when a conflict is domestic, when it is a tribal system which lasts. The more a conflict lasts, the more it becomes a business. People traffic in migrant, in drug, in cigarette. They don't like peace because they are afraid, including government. So it is up to the center, and I'm grateful to be invited by them, and I know their expertise and competence, to think of how to address the causes of some of our conflict. If not, we can talk as we want for peacekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been beaten by the clock and lunch awaits. But before that, I kindly ask you to appreciate the panel and the contributions we've had from Chairman and Madame from the floor. Thank you very much. This is a big subject, and I hope at least that future ISAC meetings we shall be able to sort of return to it, because it is really, really important how we constitute the next missions over the next 5 or 10 years. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Hopefully we'll see you again. I'm Joel Kibazo, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.